As a massive Pokemon fan myself, I was super excited to hear about the announcement of a new open world Pokemon game, Pokemon Legends Arceus. However, there is a huge elephant in the room that we need to talk about. You may have noticed the new Pokemon game looks, different. Well, it looks terrible. So terrible, in fact, that Forbes actually released an article talking about the poor design of the game. From the sparse and barren landscape to the washed out color and textures, there are so many issues I already have with the look of this game. And as a channel about game art, I felt compelled to talk about this game and hopefully have a good discussion with you guys about what makes good environment art and what exactly makes this game look so terrible. And if you're looking to learn more about environments and creating environments in Unreal Engine, I'm super happy to announce that I've got a brand new course called the Environment Artist Survival Kit, where I'm going to teach you everything about creating environments from scratch. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to check it out. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty, I'd like to preface that this video is in no way meant to be a jab at any of the game developers or artists at Game Freak or any other studio working on this game. I understand making games is incredibly difficult for everyone involved. Stylized Station isn't a video game critique channel, but an educational channel first and foremost. So all critique will be focused on the artistic aspects of the game trailers that have been shown to the public so far. I mean, no disrespect to the artists working on this game, as this situation is most likely out of their control. So in order to better understand why the game itself looks bad, we need to break things down between hardware and artistic execution. There could be several other reasons, like project management and issues with staffing and all this other stuff, but it's hard to speculate on any of those issues with the development team, so we're not going to do that. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is the graphical limitations of the Nintendo Switch. There is definitely a gap in technological power between Nintendo's consoles and its competitors. While this gap was pretty small in the 90s, it's only grown bigger over the decades. While hardware limitations are a huge factor in how a game gets made, there are plenty of methods of working around such barriers, and we see this in a lot of Nintendo games. Stylization is just one method. You can spend less of a video game's memory budget on textures by hand painting a lot of the normal and lighting information onto materials. You could say this has worked in Nintendo's favor. They clearly have a defined niche in this style of game that it releases, and they know how to cater this style to their audience due to this self-imposed limitation. I mean, they've gotten by just fine with plenty of visually stunning games like The Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild, and Immortals Phoenix Rising, along with a ton of other games. But both these two titles I've mentioned have large open-world role-playing games whose unique artistic style and execution has inspired dozens of other franchises to adopt a similar style with none of these graphical issues. So what is going on? Why are we seeing visuals this incomplete this far into development? Now, the second reason, and in my opinion the most likely, is the lack of art direction. The way I see it, this issue can be broadly broken down into four main categories: art fundamentals, level design, textures, and lighting. But first, let's talk about art fundamentals. I think the closest comparison for what Pokemon Legends is going for visually is Breath of the Wild. As you can see in this side-by-side comparison, Pokemon Legends falls a little short. Well, very short. From a wide distance shot like this, you can see similarities in the broad shapes, but Pokemon lacks a clear separation of foreground, middle ground, and background, unlike the Breath of the Wild. Now, speaking of broad shapes, I can only really see big shapes. The environment is incredibly sparse. In good environments and the visual arts in general, variation in scenes tends to be built in threes. Like we mentioned previously, having 3 degrees of separation, the foreground, middle ground, and background, is key to good composition and helps lead the eye throughout the scene. Another principle in art is to have 3 categories of size and detail called primary, secondary, and tertiary shapes, which could be thought of as your big, medium, and small shapes. And all of this typically has at least 3 variations in color per material. As you can see in the Pokemon trailer, there seems to be a lack of this variation. I really only see 1 variation per type of tree, some grass, and the base landscape. And this is what makes the environment look empty and sparse. These principles serve as a guideline that help create believability in environments and is more pleasing to the eye, but there can be exceptions to this rule. The second thing I wanted to talk about is the level design, which just seems very uninteresting in general. In a lot of the shots, it feels like you can see every corner of the map due to the flat terrain and far off vistas in plain view, which doesn't help for performance, and nothing in nature is truly flat. That's why this looks a little strange to you. To make environments believable and interesting, it's important to have some nooks and crannies in the landscape. You want to hint at where the player can go without revealing too much. This trailer suggests there's nothing for the player to discover, no mysteries to uncover, almost like a giant arena where you just catch one Pokemon and then mindlessly move on to the next. At least that's what it looks like in this trailer. Now let's move on to the third issue, which is the textures, or lack thereof. They probably had a small texture budget for this game, but the issues here aren't solely related to the low resolution. There's very, very obvious tiling in almost every landscape and water material. Also, the normal maps are catching the light in a very strange way, and probably from having the normal intensity just a little too high. Again, this isn't really an artistic direction call, it just seems like it's off. Another problem with their textures is that the color palette seems to be way off on many of the different environment assets. Just take a look at these tree leaves. On the right hand side, it looks like they're trying to add a gradient between the top and bottom of the canopy, but the gradient is too harsh and unrealistic. This should be subtle and vary only in value, not the hue. The normals on the tree themselves are also super strange as well, which makes every treetop have really poor shading. Another problem is the placement of the tree leaf cards around the canopy. I can easily see the cards as a flat plane. These branch clusters should be slightly bent as well to avoid these kinds of things. While we're on the subject of foliage, let's take a look at the grass in the game as well, because this has been really bothering me. In this shot, the grass is a straight wall of foliage with seemingly no spacing in between the individual blades per clump. While this may reduce vertex count and draw calls, it looks horrible. There's also a weirdly colored runtime virtual gradient on the base of the grass clumps that doesn't seem to relate to the terrain material. For reference, a basic method to follow when creating grass is to combine each clump or individual blade into an even larger cluster, placing each plane at different angles by crossing, rotating, and angling the different grass cards. This method makes it so the grass looks unique and realistic from every angle that you view it from. You can see this in most games today, even games on the Switch, like Breath of the Wild, which came out 4 years ago. So unless they are working with extreme technical and graphical limitations, I don't see any reason why this choice would be made. And one of the biggest things I wanted to talk about, and something that caught my attention and probably your attention first, was the lack of lighting, shadows, and post-processing. Every shot in this trailer is completely washed out, which doesn't help the already bad materials. When you're looking a long distance, normally there is a ton of fog to help you gauge whether something is close or far away, and we don't see that here. Now, a lot of people will say that lighting is a technical constraint, but with a more concerted effort with color grading, color balance, and overall lighting, you can easily create beautiful, beautiful environments without having to use that much intensity. Look, I know as a Pokemon fan, all of this stuff is painful to hear, and it never feels good giving harsh truths about games or game art, but Pokemon is a huge franchise, and I'm just shocked that $1 billion company couldn't wait long enough to develop a quality product or hire the right senior level talent to carry the vision that needed to be created. Now, we don't have any insider knowledge on the development of this game, so I can't pretend to know if there are some problems with the developing of the project or if there were personnel changes or anything like that. But what I want to know is, what do you guys think? Do you think this comes down to poor project management? Has Game Freak bitten off more than they can chew? Or is this all intentional and it will be fixed in the next coming months? I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on the comments. As usual, I'm Thomas from Stylized Station, and I will see you in the next video.